Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Story Stalking, which is brought to you by Dead to Rights, the podcast video for the crime genre industry. I'm your host, Donna Carrick, and today I'm delighted to bring you a short story written by Ed Piwowarczyk, which first appeared in the Key of 13 by the Mesdames of Mayhem, Carrick Publishing, 2019. Ed is a retired journalist who worked for the National Post, the Toronto Sun, and the Sioux Star. He's also edited quite a number of Harlequin manuscripts, and he is a freelance editor currently working out of Toronto. So if you need an editor, let me know and I'll try to put you in touch with Ed. He's a lifelong fan of crime fiction, and he's also a film and trivia buff. And his short fiction has been published in the Toronto Sisters in Crime anthologies, as well as in the Mesdames of Mayhem anthologies, most recently in the Key of 13, which is the one I'm reading for you today. And also to let you know that Ed has also got a story being featured in our upcoming anthology titled A Grave Diagnosis, which is a Carrick Publishing crime anthology. So we're delighted to have his story in that. And watch for that anthology, 35 Stories of Murder and Malaise, to come out. Its official release date has been announced as October 31st. And we'll be doing an online launch for the book with many of our authors involved. You'll be invited to join us for that, and we'll really look forward to seeing you there on Saturday, October 31st. I believe it will start at 2 o'clock, but I'll confirm the time when we get a little bit closer. So I hope to see you there, and this is going to be a great anthology and a lot of fun. So now let me bring you this story by Ed Piwowarczyk titled The Ballad of Will Robinson, and it's from In the Key of 13 by the Mesdames of Mayhem, Carrick Publishing, 2019. My name is Will Robinson, same as the kid in that 60s TV show, Lost in Space. My fictional counterpart had a robot who warned, "Danger, Will Robinson, danger." Too bad that robot wasn't around when Rose Connolly entered my life. Maybe I wouldn't have been so beguiled by her beauty. Maybe I would have steered clear of her. Maybe we'd both be alive. Perhaps the robot would have cautioned me to temper my passion for collecting traditional folk music, lest my obsession be the death of me, literally. But there was no robot for this Will Robinson. Instead, I'm looking up at the stars from a shallow grave, playing out the final verse of my personal murder ballad. I was born in 1940, the only child of middle-class parents, and grew up as rock and roll took hold on the record charts and a folk music revival blossomed. Most teenagers my age listened to Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Buddy Holly. But my musical heroes were Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, the Weavers, Leadbelly, the Kingston Trio, Peter, Paul and Mary, Joan Baez, and of course, the young Bob Dylan. Listening to and delving into the history of songs of economic hardship, disasters, civil rights, union struggles, war, and love became my obsession. With an eye towards someday opening my own shop, I worked at Anderson's, one of the city's downtown record stores, part-time as a student, then full-time once I'd earned my arts degree. What better way to save money while learning about the record business? Then came July 25th, 1965, when Dylan switched from acoustic guitar to electric at the Newport Folk Festival. Up-and-coming singers and songwriters followed his lead, and the music I loved faded from the mainstream. But I continued to work and save, determined that my store would keep those traditional sounds alive. Then, in 1974, my parents died in a car crash. I was left with a modest inheritance and some insurance money. Along with my own savings, there was enough for me to open my dream record shop. I rented a small town Main Street storefront in a town of about 6,000 souls, about an hour's drive from the city. It included a 2-bedroom upstairs apartment with a separate entrance at the back, perfect for a bachelor like me. And voila, Robinson's Records was born. I specialized in folk music and blues and carried strictly vinyl. I tracked down concert posters and artists' publicity photos to adorn the shop and ordered records that reflected my personal tastes. Gradually, folk and blues devotees began to seek me out when they were looking for hard-to-find LPs, singles, or imports. I also checked out estate sales, yard sales, and auctions. You never know when a rare recording might turn up, something that might interest a customer or something for myself. I was building a private collection of first pressings and out-of-print records. The rarest 78s, 45s, and LPs I kept under lock and key in a custom-built wooden cabinet in my inner sanctum, which I dubbed the conservatory. I had turned the spare bedroom into a record library, complete with high-end hi-fi equipment. I kept my favorite albums, books, and record guides on shelves lining the walls. I rarely had guests. Once in a while, I'd invite a neighbor or a good customer up for a drink, but when I did, I'd entertain them in my living room. I had just turned 40 and settled into a comfortable groove with my life when Rose Connolly came along. One spring day in 1980, I was reading Goldmine magazine, a publication for record collectors, behind the counter when I heard the door open and close. I looked up to see a slender woman dressed in a sleeveless white top that accentuated the curve of her breasts, a tan miniskirt showcasing long, shapely legs, and brown suede ankle boots. She was in her mid-20s, I guessed, and stood about 5'6". She had auburn hair in a pixie cut, a straight nose, heart-shaped lips, and sapphire eyes. She flashed me a smile. "Mr. Robinson." I was momentarily dumbstruck, then collected myself. "Call me Will." I stepped out from behind the counter. "How can I help you?" "My name is Rose Connolly." She extended her hand, and I unfolded her smooth, delicate fingers in mine. "I'm looking for, well, I'm not really sure." She grinned sheepishly. "I'm trying to earn a master's degree in music and thought I'd do my thesis on folk music." I waited for her to continue. Then she laughed. "Folk music. Now that's narrowing it down. I must sound foolish, but I don't know where to start. I hope you can help me." I stroked my chin as I admired her figure. "Do you want to focus on a particular singer, a certain style, a period? Who are your favorites?" "There's Dylan, of course, and Baez, Joni Mitchell, people like that. I suppose everyone's done papers on Dylan." "Your advisor should know. Who is he, by the way?" "It's a woman, Dr. Barbara Grayson. In fact, she steered me to you. Are you familiar with her work?" The name gave me a jolt. "Barbara! I've read her book on Appalachian ballads." "You know her?" "I did once, intimately, I thought." "We've met," I said aloud. Barbara Grayson and I had been lovers. The first time I saw Barbara was in a music history class in my final year of university. She was a willowy blonde with shoulder-length hair, long legs, and green eyes. One day she caught me staring at her, but rather than turning away, she grinned and winked at me. It took me a couple of weeks to summon up the nerve to ask her out. I was bracing myself for a rejection, but she accepted my invitation to a campus hootenanny. The sing-along evening eliminated the need for small talk on our first date. We discovered our mutual love of folk music and soon we were regulars at coffee house performances and concerts. I was living in a room in residence, but Barbara had her own apartment, courtesy of her wealthy parents, close to the campus. Soon I was spending more and more time there. Evenings consisted of eating takeout food, drinking cheap wine, listening to albums, and talking about our futures. Her goal was to pursue a career as a musicologist, while mine was to own a record shop. At the time, that seemed far away. What consumed us back then was our heated lovemaking. Nothing seemed quite as important as our sex life. After graduation, we shocked our families by moving in together without getting married. Barbara went on to postgraduate studies, while I worked my way up to management at Anderson's and started building my record collection. About 6 months after moving in together, Barbara's bedroom ardor began to wane, and our lovemaking became more perfunctory than passionate. One night, as she rolled over to go to sleep, I asked, "Is there someone else?" She turned and propped herself up on one elbow. "What?" "You heard me." "No, there isn't anyone else. I've had offers for afternoon quickies, but I've never accepted. If I had, would you have noticed or cared?" "How can you say that? What we have is, what we had was good. But people change. I keep waiting for you to grow up, but you don't." "Haven't I encouraged your studies?" "Yes, you have. The concerts and records, they're part of my education, an important part. But I want to study the musical past, not be a prisoner to it like you. I want something more out of my life." "Like what?" "Like a family, maybe." Suddenly it hit me. "You're pregnant." "Yes." Her voice grew gentle. "I was waiting for the right time to tell you. I thought you'd be happy." She put a hand out to touch me, but I turned away. "It'll be tough at first, but we can make it work. My parents will help, and—" "No!" I was confused and terrified. "We're not ready." Then I lashed out. "You get your baby." "Our baby," she said. "And your doctorate, but I don't get my record store. That's not fair." "Listen to yourself. You love your records more than you love anything or anyone, including me." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" She paused for a moment. "What if I and your records suddenly disappeared? Which would you miss most?" I hesitated, and in that moment, I lost her. Her eyes flashed with anger. "You have to think about it?" She held up a hand. "Don't say anything. I have my answer." She turned her back to me. "Don't touch me." She turned off the bedside light. "Someday you'll regret choosing vinyl over flesh and blood." The next day, Barbara was gone. Rose waved her hand in front of my face. "Hello, Mr. Robinson. Will, are you okay?" "What?" I emerged from my reverie. Yes, I'm fine. Where were we?" "We were about to discuss narrowing my focus." "Right." I thought for a moment. "Well, you could examine a particular period, going back decades or even centuries. If you're interested in musical styles, there's bluegrass, country blues, Delta blues, ethnic songs, Appalachian ballads, spirituals. It all comes down to your tastes." Her shoulders sagged. "It seems so daunting. Maybe I'd better forget about it." "No, don't give up. Call it what you will, midlife crisis, loneliness, romance, lust, but I was bewitched by Rose." "Let me think," I said. Then an idea came to me. "I know. Let's enroll you in Will's Folk Music 101. Follow me." She looked at me quizzically, but trailed behind me as I headed for the bins. I started pulling out albums, recordings by Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, The Weavers, Leadbelly, and Odetta. "Listen to these and see what you think." She reached into her shoulder bag, but I held up my hand. "No charge. If any of these appeal to you, come back and see me, and we'll talk some more. I handed her the albums, and she kissed me on the cheek. I really appreciate this, she said, clutching the records to her chest. I opened the door for her, and she gave me a little wave as I watched her get into a red Corvette across the street. As she drove off, it occurred to me that the Corvette was somewhat flashy compared to my modest gray Chevette. I assumed a student, even a postgrad student, would drive something more economical. A week later, she was back. Will, those albums, they were great, but that makes it even harder to find a focus for my thesis. Any other suggestions? I tried to hide my excitement at seeing her again. Sure. I plucked out more selections from the bins. Doc Watson, the new Lost City Ramblers, Bill Monroe, Tom Paxton, Dave Van Ronk. Once again, I waved off her offer to pay. You've been such a help, she said, as I bagged the records. Surely there's something I can do to thank you. Here's your chance, Will, I thought. I cleared my throat. How about having dinner with me sometime? It's a date, but let me treat you. I insist, she said. Okay, how's Italian sound? Antonio's down the street has great lasagna. Perfect. Let's say next Saturday, 6 o'clock. She turned to go. Wait, I was so excited that I reached under the counter for a special compilation. There's probably no better primer than this. It was the multi-LP anthology of American folk music, released in 1952. The cover of the first release, I had one locked away in the conservatory, featured an ancient instrument called a monochord, while the 1960s reissue, also in my collection, had a photograph of a Depression-era farmer. It was a distinction that would likely only be noted by a collector. Whenever I came across the reissue, I snapped it up, notified enthusiasts, and sold it to whoever made the best offer. This one had been put aside for one of those select few, but the customer hadn't picked it up or paid for it yet, so I gave it to Rose. I told her the anthology, a collection of songs originally recorded between the late 20s and early 30s, was a touchstone of the Greenwich Village folk scene and introduced artists such as the Carter family, Mississippi John Hurt, Uncle Dave Macon, and Sleepy John Estes to a wider audience. You've been holding out on me, Will, Rose chided. Naughty, naughty. Then she chuckled. Just kidding. See you on Saturday. Once she had gone, I phoned Daniel, old Dan Tucker, to advise him that the anthology I'd earmarked for him was no longer available. Born into a wealthy family, Tucker had made millions more in enterprises as varied as construction and pharmaceuticals. The combination of money and rumored mob connections gave him a fearsome reputation. Now he had become a collector, aggressively seeking out and bidding on art, antiques, and records. I'd expected an angry blast for letting the anthology go, but to my surprise, he was unperturbed. Someone came along with a better offer then. I didn't contradict him. That's disappointing, he said, but I'll have it in good time. Although I had never invited Tucker up to my apartment, he suspected I owned more than what was for sale in my shop. Whenever he made a purchase, he offered to buy my private collection, which I always denied having. I'm a man who gets what he wants, whatever it takes, he said. I can wait for you to sell, but not indefinitely. Before I could protest, he said, look, why not show me your collection? We can make a deal. You can name your price within reason. There is no collection, I said. If you say so, just remember, the time may come when you'll regret not taking up my offer. Then he hung up. The streetlights were on when we left Antonio's. That was wonderful, Will, Rose said as I walked her to her car. Thanks for suggesting Antonio's. You won't find anything better in the city, not even in Little Italy. Glad you liked it, I said, although it was a little far for you to come for a bit of pasta. She smiled. It was worth the drive. Dinner at Antonio's couldn't have gone better. We had dressed up for the occasion, me in a black tie, blue plaid shirt and jeans, and her in a red miniskirt, a white off-the-shoulder top, and black high heels. We got off to an awkward start, but some Chianti loosened us up. Before long, the wine and the conversation were flowing. After I'd sketched out my background, she gave me hers. Her parents divorced when she was 6, and after the split, her mother developed a drug problem. Rose ended up being raised by an elderly aunt and uncle, now deceased. After graduating with a Bachelor of Arts degree, she landed a job as an executive assistant. She wouldn't say to whom or what she did. My boss likes to keep everything hush-hush, she said. I poured more wine. What about the Corvette? How can a working girl afford a car like that? It was a gift from my boss. That's all I can say. Before I could ask more, she added, next subject? As for her thesis, I'm working on my master's part-time, she said. When I met Dr. Grayson, she suggested I visit your shop. She sipped her wine. And here we are. As we approached her car, she groped in her purse for her keys and stumbled slightly. I caught her by the elbow to steady her. Rose, you seem a little tipsy. Do you think you should drive right now? She put her hand to her forehead for a moment, then stood straight. I guess not. She handed me her car keys. Can you take me to a motel? In the car, I became emboldened by the wine. Look, don't waste money on some flea bag. Crash at my place. I thought she would politely turn me down, but instead she gave me a coquettish smile. Why, Will Robinson, she drawled in a mock Southern accent. Would that be proper? I'm not trying to hustle you. There's a sofa bed and enough already. She leaned in and kissed me on the lips, hard. Let's go. I parked the Corvette behind the store, led Rose upstairs, and ushered her into the living room. Home sweet home, I said. The room was modestly furnished. A television, an armchair, a couple of lamps on end tables, a stereo, record shelves, and the sofa bed. Folk festival and record posters covered the walls. A nightcap? I asked. Why not? She kicked off her shoes, leaned back on the couch, and closed her eyes. I placed an Irish whiskey in front of her on the coffee table. Then I sat in the armchair, sipping mine as I watched, ogled her. She must have sensed me staring at her. Raising her head and looking straight at me, she picked up her drink and downed it in one shot. Then she patted the seat beside her. Come here, Will. As I sat beside her, she put her hand behind my head and gave me a long, sensuous kiss. Then she drew back. Well? I grabbed her by the waist, tugged her into me, nuzzled her neck, and gave her a passionate kiss. She purred. Where should we do it? Here or, she pointed to my bedroom door, in there. I tried to contain my excitement. Definitely there, I said. I pulled her up from the couch and led her to the bedroom. Our love-making was frenzied at first, leaving us panting. Then we settled into a gentle rocking rhythm. I hadn't been so aroused and so sated since Barbara left me. Sunlight streaming through the bedroom window roused me from my slumber. Yawning, I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and rolled over to face Rose. But the space beside me was empty. Rose, I threw on my bathrobe. Where are you? In here. Where was here? Then it hit me. The conservatory. I hurried in to find her sitting on the couch, sipping a mug of coffee. She was wearing nothing but one of my shirts, unbuttoned in the front. Will, she put the mug on the coffee table, rushed over and threw her arms around me. I hope you don't mind me borrowing this. She tugged at the shirt. Not at all. You look sexy. I summoned up a wan smile. She frowned. What's wrong? Nothing. I kissed her on the forehead. It's this room. She glanced around. What about it? I sat her down on the couch and looked her straight in the eye. I've never taken anyone to this room. No one's been in here but me. Until now, she said. I nodded. Promise you won't tell anyone. My lips are sealed. Her hand made a zipping motion across her mouth. But why? There's valuable stuff in here, I said solemnly. If word got out, collectors would pester me to sell, and I might become a target for thieves. Tucker suddenly came to mind. She looked around the room again, then turned back to me. Why is one of these records worth more than another? It depends on a number of factors, I said. The artist, the condition of the record, the cover, the rarity, the pressing. Okay, she said. I get the picture. She pointed to the cabinet. What's in there? Now she knew about the conservatory, but did she have to know all about it? My reluctance evaporated as she looked into my eyes. They're my most prized records, I finally said. Some 78s by old bluesmen like Elmore James and Charlie Patton, 45s from the 50s and 60s, LPs like Dylan's The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. How is that rare? Rose cut in. I've seen plenty of copies. Yeah, but the earliest pressings were a mistake, and those are the ones that are rare, I explained. Just before its release in 1963, 4 songs were replaced with newly recorded tracks. I don't know why. Somehow someone at the pressing plant used the old version of the album instead of the new masters to put out an unknown number of LPs. That's incredible, she said. So how much are all of these worth? Hard to say. Some might be worth a couple of $100, while others might fetch a few thousand. She scanned the room. Is this some sort of investment? No, I snapped. This isn't about money. I'm not going to sell anything here. Don't you get it? She drew back from me. No, I don't. These are just things. I inhaled deeply. To me, they're priceless, even sacred. I struggled to find the right words. All of this is me. If I lost anything here, it would be like losing a piece of my soul. She was silent for a moment. Now I understand. I'm sorry I intruded. She was about to rise, but I pleaded, Don't go, please. I hung my head, then looked back up. I'm just confused at the moment. It's been so long since... She put a finger to my lips. Don't explain. Then she gave me a soulful kiss. You do want me in your life, don't you? Yes, I said hoarsely. Then show me. She peeled off the shirt. I slipped out of my bathrobe. Dinners at Antonio's, attending auctions and yard sales, looking for collectibles, drives in the countryside, love-making that swung between frenzied urgency and rhythmic rocking, weekends with Rose couldn't arrive soon enough. She quickly made herself at home in my apartment. About 2 weeks after our first date, she arrived with a small suitcase. Just something to leave here, she said. She stuffed some clothes in a dresser drawer and cleared some closet space in my bedroom. This way I don't have to pack in a rush after work. She hung up a black negligee, then turned to me. I'm sorry, I should have asked. She gave me a mock, contrite look. You don't mind, do you? Picturing her in that negligee erased whatever misgivings I might have had. The following Friday evening, Rose was late for our weekend rendezvous. She arrived just after midnight. Sorry for keeping you up, Will, she said. I didn't expect to have to work late tonight. I was going to phone, but the only number I have is for the store. Is there another number? No, I replied. I should have told you. My business number is also my home number. The phone up here is an extension. I handed her a glass of the wine I'd poured while I'd been waiting for her. You could probably use this, I said. It has been a long day. She sat on the couch and sipped the wine. There's going to be more of them, I'm afraid. There's a special project at work and... You still haven't told me what you do, I interjected, or who you work for. My boss is very secretive, Sorry, I can't tell you. Can you live with that, Will? Guess I'll have to. Anyway, with this project, he wants to be able to reach me at any time, she continued. I hate to ask this, but do you mind if I give him this number? I was annoyed, but tried to hide it. I suppose not. Maybe your boss wants to buy a few records. She beamed. You're a sweetheart. Thanks for understanding. As we finished breakfast the next morning and I was about to head downstairs to the store, Rose asked, Will, can I have your keys? I automatically dug into my jeans pocket for my keyring, fished it out, and was about to hand it over when I stopped. Why? I want to get a set cut for myself at the hardware store, she said. I stood there speechless. Don't you see, she said, we can avoid what happened last night. Next time I can phone ahead, and you won't have to wait up. I can let myself in and join you in bed. I'm not sure, I said. Look, I'm also going to give a set of my keys to you. She tore a sheet of paper from a notepad and scribbled on it. There, she handed it to me, my address and phone number in the city. I know you don't go in often, but when you do, I'll be waiting. Drop in any time. I stood there staring at her. Don't you trust me? She asked. We're making a commitment to each other with our keys. Or don't you want that? I swallowed hard. You're right. I took her hand. Come on, I have to open the store first. Once that was done, I tossed her my keys. She threw her arms around me. That wasn't so hard, was it? She gave me a quick kiss before heading out. That night, we were listening to music in the conservatory when she pointed to the cabinet. You know, I've never heard any of the music you've got locked away in there. How about playing something now, please? Her request caught me off guard, and I wavered for a moment. Sorry, but no. Not even for me, she pouted. Why not? I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Some of them, the 78s, are shellac records, not vinyl. They're brittle and can break easily. Sometimes the spindle hole size won't fit modern players. Others may be... Stop, she interrupted. I don't want a long-winded explanation. Keep it short. I took a deep breath. Okay, I'm afraid they'll be broken, damaged, lost, or stolen when they're not locked up. I paused. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to them. Let me see if I understand, she said. The cabinet is like a safe deposit box, a place to store your musical valuables, but that you open only occasionally. I nodded. Not often, then. That's interesting, she quickly continued. Anyway, I guess I'll never see the point of having those records if we can't listen to them. I wish I could explain it better. I was expecting her to press me more about the collection, but she said, Don't worry about it. She leaned in and gave me a deep kiss. The next morning, Rose slid out of bed and put on her negligee. She looked sexy as hell. Go back to sleep, she whispered, and kissed me on the cheek. I mumbled, rolled over, and pretended to doze. Once she was out of the bedroom, I got into my bathrobe and tiptoed down the hall. I just had to tell you. Her voice was low but excited. I've got them. Yes, I'll have something for you soon. Be patient. If you're satisfied, there'll be more. Gotta go. Bye. As she hung up, she turned and saw me standing in the living room entrance. She yelped, Will! She put a hand to her chest and breathed deeply. You startled me. I sat down beside her on the sofa. What was that all about? I just remembered something I had to tell my boss, she said. I had to make a quick call. Couldn't it have waited? Afraid not. She threw her arms around my neck and gave me a long kiss. I hope this doesn't happen again, but I can't promise it won't. Try to understand. Okay, I grumbled. The negligee fell from her shoulders. Let me make it up to you. On one of our drives into the countryside in early August, we parked at the side of the road near a bridge. We strolled along the bank of a fast-flowing river, and our ambling soon brought us to a willow tree, its branches drooping low over the water. It's lovely, Rose purred, then turned to me. Like a Monet painting, don't you think? Yeah, makes for romantic pictures. Before long, we were lying in each other's arms beneath a tree. We dozed as a breeze rustled the branches above us. When I finally stirred, I glanced at my watch. We'd better get going. It's almost 6. Rose sat up and rubbed her eyes. Do we have to? You said you had to leave early, remember? A morning meeting. Right, she sighed. We should go. She slowly looked around before we started to leave. This spot is so idyllic. I want to come back and spend the day. She clapped her hands. I know. We could have a picnic. Let's do it, Will. Don't you dare say it's corny. How about next weekend? I smiled. Sure thing. As we strolled back to the car, clouds drifted by overhead, casting shadows on our path. My mood shifted from contentedness to melancholy. Songs of lovers, willows, and rivers started to swirl in my head. None of them ended happily. Once Rose was on her way back to the city that evening, my disquiet led me to the conservatory. Surveying my musical shrine calmed me, but something niggled at the back of my mind. Then I did what I hadn't done since I'd been seeing Rose. I unlocked the cabinet. The cabinet had 3 shelves, each divided into 6 compartments. The top 2 shelves were in order, but the bottom one was empty. I swayed and bent over as if I'd been punched in the gut by a prize fighter. I lurched to the washroom, expecting to vomit, but only dry heaved. I felt as if my heart had been ripped out. No one but Rose could have done this. I cursed her and my own stupidity. What she'd said when I overheard her on the phone was no longer cryptic. I've got them. My key ring, which included the key to the cabinet. I'll have something for you soon. The first batch of stolen records. Be patient. Her boss wants results soon. If you're satisfied, there'll be more. She was cherry-picking the collection for her boss. Then I recalled one of her fleeting remarks. Not often then. That's interesting. Another instance of my stupidity. I'd admitted that I rarely opened the cabinet. I cursed. Rose would pay for this, I vowed. I breathed deeply to calm myself. I looked at my watch. It was 10:30. My anger-addled brain decided it would be a good time to pay Rose a visit. The city was only an hour's drive away. I could be at her place by midnight, burst in on her. But then what? Slow down. Think. Then it came to me. See where she goes, who she meets, find out who her boss is. I grabbed a few hours of restless sleep before heading to the city for my early morning stakeout. Around 6 a.m., I found the 3-story apartment complex where Rose lived and her Corvette in the adjacent tenant's parking lot. I parked a few doors down the street to keep an eye on the building's entrance. 3 hours later, Rose emerged, holding a black record carrier case. Damn it, what's in there is mine. She wore a strapless knee-length white sundress and brown gladiator sandals, an outfit that would turn men's heads, but not mine, not anymore. She wasn't alone. Accompanying her was a slim woman in a beige top and long denim skirt. Her hair was tucked under a wide-brimmed straw hat, and her face was obscured by dark glasses. What the hell? Rose never mentioned a roommate. When they reached the Corvette, Rose stashed the case in the trunk. Then the women exchanged a long embrace before parting. As Rose drove off, the mystery woman headed my way. I started up the Chevette and drove off, turning my face away as I passed her, hoping she hadn't seen me. I thought I'd lost Rose a few times in the city traffic, but the Corvette's red exterior allowed me to pick up her tail quickly enough. Before long, I followed her into Tuxedo Heights, home to the city's upper crust. She parked in the driveway of a 2-door mansion, retrieved the case from the trunk, and approached the front door. I cruised by as she waited to be let in, noted the address, and then accelerated down the street. I drove to the public library's central branch and looked up the address in the city directory. Daniel Tucker's name jumped out at me. My last conversation with Tucker took on new meaning. I'm a man who gets what he wants. He wanted my records, whatever it takes. Having Rose seduce me was a means to an end. The time may come when you'll regret not taking my offer. He'd have the records he wanted, and I'd be left with nothing. The gift of the Corvette was a down payment for Rose's services, and there was likely more coming her way. To Tucker, the records were just things to own for the sake of owning them. They meant so much more to me. What could I do? Call the police? They'd find no signs of a break-in, and I couldn't prove anything had been stolen. Confront Tucker? He'd simply laugh. Again, no proof. Then I realized Rose didn't know that I knew about the stolen records. How could I take advantage of that? Fury consumed me as I drove home. As I sat in the conservatory fuming over Rose, I pulled out a 1958 Everly Brothers album, Songs Our Daddy Taught Us, and Down in the Willow Garden, a murder ballad, caught my ear. A murder ballad is a story song, rooted in Appalachian, Irish, Scottish, and English ballads, of a violent death based on a mythic or real crime. The song tells listeners who the victim, often a woman, is, describes how the killer lures her to a remote murder site, depicts the murder itself, frequently stabbing or drowning, and recounts the killer's capture, escape, or execution. Down in the Willow Garden is believed to have originated in Ireland in the 19th century and later found its way into Appalachia. There have been various versions, including one by a bluegrass musician, Charlie Monroe, which the Everly Brothers sing on the album. In the song, a woman meets her lover in a willow garden, where he gives her poisoned wine, stabs her with a saber, and throws her into the river. At the end of the song, the murderer is facing the gallows. His father, who put him up to it, the lyrics hint, has been unable to buy his freedom. The name of the victim in the song? Rose Connolly. I could have kicked myself. Why hadn't I twigged onto that earlier? Then I seized on an idea. Why not follow the lead of the killer's song? Poison in Rose's wine? Its taste or smell might tell her the drink had been tampered with. Better to spike it with tranquilizers crushed into powder to knock her out. Then there was the saber. I opted to substitute a chef's knife, like the one used in the shower scene in Psycho. I drove to the city to make my purchases, away from the eyes of curious townsfolk. A light breeze stirred the branches as we spread a blanket beneath the willow. Rose dropped her picnic hamper beside the tree, and I followed suit with my knapsack, which held the wine, the sleeping powder, and the knife. She kicked off her canvas sneakers and lay on her back. Come here, Will. She patted a spot next to her and turned onto her side. What's wrong? She asked when I joined her. You've been on edge since we left your place. I'm just a little tired. I haven't been sleeping well lately. What had me tossing and turning was wondering whether I had the resolve to carry out my plan. Maybe I can perk you up. She drew my head to hers, giving me a deep, lingering kiss, one that I returned with equal fervor. Soon my lips were exploring her sun-kissed neck and shoulders, above her tube top, while my hands stroked the sleek legs beneath her denim shorts. Then guilt over what I planned to do overcame me, and I eased away from her. Sorry, I just can't. She sat up. What gives? When I didn't reply, she said, maybe we should forget about this. No, it's such a beautiful day, and I've got the cure for the blues right here. I dragged over the hamper. Here we have, I started to put out bread, cheese, cold cuts, and olives. All this, not to mention, I raised a bottle of wine from my knapsack, this. We don't want to let all this go to waste. Her expression softened. No, we don't, she smiled. How about some wine? Coming right up. I turned my back to her as I uncorked the wine, slipped a generous dose of the powdered tranquilizer into a white plastic cup and handed it to her. Bottoms up. As we snacked, she drank more spiked wine. After a while, she murmured, I'm feeling kind of drowsy. Her head bobbed. Will, what's happening? She moaned, tried to stand, but collapsed on the blanket. Her eyes closed and she lay still. I sat watching her for I don't know how long, letting my anger over her deception simmer. Finally, I got the knife from my pack and knelt beside her. I raised the blade over my head, then froze. Focus, damn it! I stared at her bare midriff. Do it! I gripped the knife's handle with both hands and held it above me as if I were making a sacrifice. Do it! I pictured blood blossoming around her navel. Do it! For a moment, I thought I saw Rose staring up at me wide-eyed. Impossible. Then again, and again, and again. The killing frenzy left me gasping. I slowly opened my eyes, flinching, as I gazed at Rose's bloody body. We had driven there in the Corvette, so I fished her keys out of her shorts and put them into mine. I staggered to my feet, then dragged her corpse to the riverbank. I rolled it into the water, then watched as the current carried it downstream. When it had disappeared from sight, I hung my head, but shed no tears. I had become a monster. I got off an overnight Greyhound bus at the town's terminal around 2 a.m. I figured at that hour in the dark, none of my neighbors would notice my late arrival home, but I kept away from the streetlights. As I climbed the steps to my apartment, I went over what I had done to cover my tracks. After stuffing the blood-stained knife and blanket, the hamper, and Rose's sneakers into the black plastic garbage bag that I'd tucked away in my pack, I drove to our rural garbage dump. By then, the sun was setting, and no attendant was in sight. Spotting a couple of bears pawing through the landfill, I heaved the bag onto a pile of trash near them. I envisioned them ripping it open and strewing the contents among the waste. Next, after I'd parked the car in the alley behind my place, I showered, changed my clothes. My blood-stained t-shirt and shorts went into the garbage bag that I planned to drop off at the dump the next day. Then I headed to the city to ditch the Corvette. I parked it at a metered space downtown where I was sure it would be ticketed and towed. I hoped this would befuddle the police when Rose's body was found. Rose had stashed her handbag under the front passenger seat when we'd set off for our picnic. I found it and searched for my duplicate keys. Not there. But if they turned up later, so what? They were part of my relationship with Rose, something I wasn't planning to deny when the police came calling. I wasn't worried about my fingerprints in the Corvette. The car, with Rose behind the wheel and me seated beside her, had become a familiar sight around town. But I wiped the steering wheel clean anyway. Then I locked the car, dropped Rose's keys down a sewer grate, and caught the overnight Greyhound bus to town. What had I missed? As I entered my apartment, I remembered that Rose had come up to use the washroom before we left. Meet you downstairs, she'd called, and then closed the bathroom door. No longer trusting her, I'd hidden at the top of the stairs to find out what she was up to. I heard her scurry into the living room and place a furtive phone call. We're heading out now. All clear for the day. Bye. She dashed back to the washroom and flushed the toilet. Coming, she yelled as I scrambled down the steps. Then it dawned on me. The duplicate keys. She'd given them to someone, and her call had rolled out a welcome mat for a thief. I ran to the conservatory, unlocked the cabinet, and yanked the doors open. Empty. I knelt on the floor in front of the cabinet, staring at the space that had once held my prized possessions. I couldn't summon up any rage. I felt nothing inside. 5 days later, I read a newspaper account of Rose's body being found. Fishermen snag corpse, the headline read. Anglers had found her about halfway between the town and the city, well away from our picnic spot. Rose's roommate, or Tucker, or both, would point the police in my direction, so I decided to call the cops first. I explained my relationship with Rose and expressed my shock at her death. I invited investigators to question me at the store and showed them where we'd had the picnic. If they had hoped to make an arrest, they left disappointed. Her clothes in my apartment? She often stayed overnight. The ground around the willow? No sign of anything suspicious. When was the last time you saw her? The day of the picnic. Had there been a lover's quarrel? No. Weren't you worried when you didn't hear from her? No, we generally saw each other only on weekends. How do you explain her body being found in the river and her car in the city? I can't. Neighbors recalled seeing us together around town and in her Corvette, but as to the last time, they couldn't be sure. The police had nothing to tie me to Rose's murder. With no progress in the investigation, the media soon lost interest in the case. It was early October, and I was heading home after dinner at Antonio's. The last time I'd been there was with Rose, so I was hesitant to return, but my craving for good Italian food overcame that. The staff expressed sympathy for my loss and provided a complimentary bottle of wine. It was dusk, and the streetlights had just started to come on. As I approached my building, I froze. A black Lincoln town car with two shadowy figures in the front seat was parked across the street. A light glowed in my living room. What's going on? I dashed around to my back entrance, crept up the stairs, and peeked into the living room. There on the sofa sat Barbara, wearing a gray sweatshirt and faded jeans. Her blonde hair hung loosely on her shoulders. Her eyes were closed. Her legs were tucked under her. A glass of wine was in her hand. She looked as good as ever. Struggling to keep my composure, I eased into the armchair across from her and cleared my throat. What are you doing here, Barbara? Her eyes blinked open. Will Robinson. She fixed her gaze on me, prompting me to shift in my seat. After all these years, that's all you can say? She swung her legs out, reached for the bottle of wine beside her, and poured me a glass. Don't worry, it's not poisoned like in those murder ballads. She refilled her glass and took a swig. See? I downed the glass and rephrased my question. Why are you here? I'll get to that, but first let's have a toast. She filled the glasses again. To the past, to the people we once were, and the love we lost. We both drank before Barbara continued. As for my visit, I wanted to talk about us. What's there to talk about? That ended years ago when you walked out on me. Not for me, her eyes welled with tears. I was still in love with you when I left. I hoped you felt the same and would come after me. But there was no phone call, no note. She wiped her eyes. You knew I was pregnant. I thought at the very least you'd want to know about our baby. But nothing. I fumbled for something to say. So was it a boy or a boy, stillborn. Complications during delivery. Her voice softened. Umbilical cord prolapse, they call it. It's rare. The cord becomes compressed and cuts off the baby's oxygen supply. She paused. I needed your shoulder to cry on, but you weren't there. She inhaled deeply. Anyway, I got on with my studies and my career. I felt guilty and ashamed. I'm sorry about the baby. Not really. You're too self-absorbed. Her words cut me to the quick. Then she reached into a shoulder bag by her feet. I also came to return these. She tossed something to me. A ring with my duplicate keys. I don't need them anymore. I stared at the keys, then at Barbara. Where did you get these? From Rose, of course. Why would she give these to her thesis advisor? Barbara grinned. There is no thesis. That was a ploy to get Rose in here. Stroke your ego and libido and get the records. You were behind this? There were 3 of us, she replied. Dan Tucker wanted your records. He got them. Rose wanted money. She got the Corvette and cash. As for me, I wanted to get back at you. I had the satisfaction of seeing you stripped of what you held most dear. I was stunned. What about the roommate? What roommate? One morning I parked near Rose's apartment. I saw her and a woman leaving. Barbara chortled with glee. Dark glasses, straw hat, that was me. So it was you in that little car. She chuckled. I thought so. She refilled our glasses. You're wondering about Rose and me, right? If you weren't student and teacher or roommates, you were friends? We were lovers, she said. I was dumbstruck. Can't believe it, can you? Barbara asked. It just happened. Tucker had Rose get in touch with me. An afternoon coffee led to dinner, then to after-dinner drinks, and then to bed. I let myself go, and she aroused me like no one ever had. We've been lovers ever since then. Barbara and Rose? If she was so in love with you, why was she so hot for me? Rose was bisexual. Going to bed with you was a game to her. Her and me, it didn't bother you? I had my reservations, she conceded, but Rose told me you were just another notch on her bedpost. Now I see I needn't have worried. Paunchy, graying hair, receding hairline. You've got the seed. The words stung. I gulped down the rest of my wine. She continued. Once Rose had your keys, I wanted to clear out your collection, but she wanted to stretch things out to get more money out of Tucker and have a bit more fun with you. But when I suspected that was your car outside the apartment, I worried that you were onto her. I urged her not to go back, but she couldn't resist one last score. Let's finish it with our picnic, she said. That day, I followed her in my car to the town bus terminal and waited by the payphone for her all-clear call. I had your keys, so as soon as you 2 were gone, getting the rest of your collection was a cinch. But Rose never came home. Barbara finished her wine. That's why I'm here, Will. You murdered Rose. She gave me another shot at love, but when you killed her, you took that away. You have to pay. Her calmness rattled me, and I shifted in my seat. What makes you think it's me and not some hitchhiking maniac? It's the ballad imagery, she replied. Remember, I wrote a book about this. The willow tree, the river, the stabbing. It all fits. Only you would use a murder ballad as your modus operandi. What's your proof? I scoffed. You'd be laughed out of court. I'm the judge and jury here, Barbara snarled, and I say you're guilty. Grabbing her shoulder bag, she went to the window, looked out, and gave a wave. What's she up to? I joined her at the window as the town car pulled out of its parking spot. Who are they? I asked. Associates of one of Tucker's connections, she said. He lost a valuable asset, as he puts it, when Rose was killed. He arranged for Nick and Marco to help me in exchange for the rest of your collection. They're mob goons, a shiver ran through me. What are you going to do? Once we meet them out back, the 4 of us are going for a ride. And if I refuse, then we'll have to persuade you, she answered. If we're not at the back entrance in a few minutes, they'll come up for us. There's no way out. I had only one chance to escape. I shoved Barbara to the floor and bolted down the stairs, hoping to reach the back door before the hoods arrived. But as I flung it open, 2 figures, their features obscured by shadows, loomed in front of me. I started to run, but one of them tackled me. The other slugged me in the jaw as I turned around, leaving my head spinning. What happened next was a blur. I had a rag stuffed into my mouth, was rolled under my stomach, and had my hands tied behind my back. I felt the jab of a syringe, and everything went black. When I came to, I was groggy. I heard the rush of water and the crackling of a campfire, and smelled wood smoke. My wrists were still bound behind me, but now I was kneeling. I felt heavy hands pressing down on my shoulders to hold me in place. Opening my eyes, I tried to get my bearings. Night had fallen, but by the light of the fire, I saw the silhouette of a tree before me. The willow where I'd killed rose, but directly in front of me was a rectangular hole, about 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide, and 8 feet long, I estimated. 2 shovels were stuck in the mounds of dirt beside it. My burial plot. Clutching a record carrier case, Barbara stepped out from the shadows behind the fire. She set the case down, crouched beside it, and gestured to the hole. Nick and Marco spent hours digging this. It's your final resting place, she said. I squirmed, but the mobster's grips remained firm. There's no getting away, Will. I slumped. Why didn't you just kill me back at my place? I wanted symmetry, Barbara replied. What could be more appropriate than your dying where you murdered Rose? How did you find this spot? Rose told me about the road, the bridge, and the river. Those I found on a map, she said, and a short walk brought us to the willow. She reached into a carrier case. Let's move on. She pulled an album from the case and held the cover in front of me. Recognize this? She tossed it into the hole and grabbed another. Or this? I was speechless as she pitched LPs, one by one, into the hole. Still nothing? I stared at the albums in the hole. Will's Folk Music 101, I said. The albums I gave Rose. It's a royal send-off, Barbara said. A pharaoh buried with his treasures. She paused. Now we come to the finale. Her hand dug into the case and came up holding a chef's knife. Since you followed the lead of a murder ballad, I figured I'd do the same, she said. I chose Pretty Polly. Remember it? I nodded. Another centuries-old song. Pretty Polly tells of a woman lured into a forest by a boyfriend, fiancé, sailor, or gambler, depending on the version. She grows more fearful the deeper they go into the woods, until they arrive at a shallow grave. The man tells her he dug it for her. Polly pleads for her life, but in vain. He kills her and flees. And the name of the killer? Barbara asked. Willie, I said softly. Will. And what did Willie do? He stabbed Polly, and her heart's blood did flow. And what happens to Willie? She asked. Depends on the version of the song. Pick one, she said. Dread crept over me. Some lyrics say there's a debt to the devil that Willie must pay. Continue, Barbara ordered. What's the debt for? I swallowed hard. For killing Pretty Polly and running away. I knew you'd get it, she said with a smirk, but I've come up with my own variation. She cleared her threat. A debt to the devil that Will must pay for killing my Rose and running away. She tightened her grip on the knife. Tonight, the devil is coming to collect. She thrust the blade into my chest and pulled it out. Go to hell, she said. Then she stabbed me again. The third time, she drove the knife into my gut and left it sticking in me. At first, I felt as if I'd been punched. There was a dull throbbing. I stared down at the knife handle and my bloodied shirt. Then panic and pain set in, and a chill ran through me. Barbara stood and took a step back. I was hoisted up, spun around, and tossed into the pit, landing on my back on top of the records. I groaned as I looked up at the stars and the quarter moon in the night sky. I'm weak now from loss of blood. Shovelful after shovelful of dirt is thrown on me. As my lifeblood oozes out, another murder ballad pops into my head. The music just won't leave me alone. This time, it's the Kingston Trio's Tom Dooley. In that song, the eponymous killer meets a woman on the mountain, stabs her, and flees. But his escape is thwarted, and he's destined to hang. Then I see the connection between Dooley and me, and it's not just that both of us murdered our lovers. Dooley laments that he might have gotten away if not for a man named Grayson. Similarly, I might have gone unpunished for Rose's murder, except for another Grayson, Barbara. How amusing! I laugh, close my eyes, and begin to hum Tom Dooley. The end. And that has been The Ballad of Will Robinson by Ed Piwowarczyk. And Ed is a wonderful writer of noir stories. You'll find him in the Sisters in Crimes anthologies, the whole Shebang series. You'll find him in most of the Mesdames of Mayhem anthologies, so look for those. You can find them at Amazon or at the Sleuth of Baker Street bookstore, in print, Kindle, or EPUB editions at iBooks. Please look for Ed. He's such a wonderful writer. And keep in mind that he is also a freelance editor of really substantial merit. So I highly recommend Ed's work. If you ever do need it, let me know, and I'll try to put you in touch with him. And thank you all for joining us for this reading of The Ballad of Will Robinson. We're so delighted that you join us each week for Story Stalking. And remember to also join us for Dead to Rights, where we interview authors every single week. You'll find an interview there with Ed Piwowarczyk, in fact, if you go into the back issues. You can find them at YouTube under Dead to Rights, or you can find them at Apple Podcasts under Dead to Rights. And be sure to like and subscribe and give our authors a real boost if you can. Anytime you can find any of our authors and do something good for them, I'd really appreciate it. I do this work for the love of our authors. Keep in mind, this is strictly nonprofit. I don't get paid, and I would not accept payment for any of this work. But I love the crime genre so deeply, and I know that you do too, or you would not join us. So please give our authors a boost anytime you can. Look for them, and you have my love, and I hope to see you next week. And I must again thank Ted Carrick for his wonderful theme song, Eyes of Gold, which will play us out. Till next week.
Dusty road, a man alone. His vital signs go on hold, and I don't know what you've been told, but the years have turned my eyes gold. And I told you what you told me, we'd never be in the same boat for free. Yet it rides, let it ride.